What's up, YouTube? I hope you're doing well. What you're about to watch is a little exchange I had with Louis. Louis is a CrossFit coach based in Australia, and he had some questions for me around some of my thoughts around CrossFit, conditioning, engine work, ergs, and beyond. And I thought it was a good opportunity to provide a bit more English content on the channel. So here we go. Without further ado, my chat with Louis. How are you?
Awesome. I'm very well. How about yourself?
Fantastic. It's good to catch up with you.
Yeah, man. It's I actually was surprised like you replied. I've followed you for a pretty long time, and like it's pretty funny. I've literally contemplated learning French just so I can understand half of your content, because I always see something pop up and I'm like, oh God, I really want to know what that says.
Well, I appreciate that. It's been a bit of the last year has been pretty crazy work-wise and in a positive way. And I did not have the headspace to double up on all my content. And
yeah, I can imagine.
Now I've switched up a few things at the beginning of this year, and it allows me to have more time, and doing more English content is one of the goals that I have for myself. So yeah, I'm starting to do a lot more videos, presentations, even starting to write a bit more for my blog and stuff like that. But I appreciate you saying that you were considering learning French. It's awesome. I like it.
Yeah, no, it's again, like I imagine it's probably, massively difficult juggling the two things on your end, coming from what I do. But I guess saying that, there's probably not too many like content creators in terms of like the stuff you create that create it in French. I don't know, I'm not too much in the French space. No, so I'd say you're probably that main source of information for a lot of people. So I completely understand that.
Yeah, it's pretty scarce in France. There definitely are some. There's lots of great creators, but I guess I'm very I talk about specific topics that I'm interested in, and I guess it seems relevant to a bunch of people. So that's a good thing, I guess. Let's get going. Maybe tell me a little bit more about yourself first, and then whatever questions you have, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, I guess I've been currently I'm a coach, online coach. So I coach mainly CrossFitters and a lot of tactical population. I'm also my other job is I'm a physical training instructor within the Australian Army as well. And I work a lot in the rehab space with that too. Been coaching and training for a fair few years, and probably over the last two, I went really deep down the bioenergetics route, starting off with like seeing Evan Pike and stuff, and then being like, what is this? This is blowing my mind, and going down that rabbit hole for a fair decent amount of time, and then finding yourself. And I guess a lot of the guys I work with are CrossFitters. I play around with Moxie myself, and do a little bit of testing on that side. I'm still trying to wrap my head around a few things, especially getting some like convoluted data. I'm just like, I don't know what the hell's going on there, but it's all part of the fun. But I think it's just like where I come from and what I want to try and bring, I guess, to my industry with CrossFit is there's a better way to do things than just sort of smash yourself every single day of the week and treat every single workout like something sports specific, and maybe taking a better approach that's not only going to give you performance, but also longevity within the sport. So I guess I know what I wanted to speak to yourself about, because I know you work with some CrossFitters, and I see the way you think, and I think it's very similar to the way I think, and I'd like to approach things, or I'd like the industry itself to approach things. And I guess kind of the biggest thing I wanted to dive down with you is I've got a few notes here, so if I'm looking down, it's just
no problem.
I'm a little bit nervous, man. I'm just like, oh crap.
Don't be. We're just having a chat, man. Honestly, it's funny you said you didn't think I was gonna reply. One of the main reasons I do what I do is to connect and exchange with people, right? That's what it might be a bit far-fetched to say that's what I live for, but really it is. I know my dad was an entertainer. He was a musician. He was always the center of the party and everything. It's just who he was. And I see some of, who he was in me as well. It's just through a different avenue. It's not through entertainment. It's more through education and information, which there's no, I wouldn't say that there's one that's better than the other. It's just different ways of approaching something. But at the end of the day, the more, I always, right when I started just, PTing 10 years ago, my goal was always to help as many people as I can. That was the ultimate goal, and it still is today. So whatever I can do to facilitate that is going to be the right way forward. And one of them is, and I know it takes up some of my time, but it's also what I want my time to be, is exchanging and helping others and answering questions and exchanging. So this is great, man. I wish more people, like you, who are interested would just ask the question. Worst case, I say no, but I mean, it's like I said, I like to chat, and I also like it when people come at me from different angles, because it allows me to try and organize my thoughts around different topics, and not always from the same starting point, which is always a good exercise for me, and also teaches me a bunch of stuff, because until you formulate it either into words on paper or with someone, it's not always easy to wrap your head around concepts you have in your head.
Yeah.
So no, I appreciate you for reaching out and allowing that to happen. That's cool.
Oh, thanks, man. I guess like the main thing I guess I wanted to at least start with the discussion is, I know through doing a lot of Evan's work, and then I guess I found him a few years ago in like the training think tank classroom, and
Yeah.
seeing his approach of how he's kind of converted like Andy Coggin's power tables to mixed modal style workouts, while being relatively crude in the sense of, exercise selection, loading, intensity, volumes, all those kinds of things, but it gives a much better ballpark, I guess, stimulus to what you're trying to actually apply to your athletes. And I think it's something that definitely needs to be considered more, but I'd love to kind of see what your thoughts are behind, applying zone style training to mixed modal work, or is it more like, that's too hard to sort of grasp, and it might be more of like a threshold 1, threshold 2 type prescription?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I recommend to anybody listening to this who hasn't gone through Evan Pycon's material to go and sign up for the classroom and watch his courses. That's where I started really with all of this. It was the classroom. I remember it was the beginning of the pandemic. I injured my back. I was laying on the couch for 2 weeks straight, just watching Evan's courses over and over again and taking notes and having my mind blown every 2 minutes. And that's kind of how the whole adventure started. So yeah, for anybody who doesn't have that context, I'd say go check that out first. I've kind of veered towards an even simpler classification, and I'm not even there yet. I haven't kind of formalized that work. That's why I'm saying this is interesting for me. I would even look at it from an intensity domains perspective. So what kind of comes before the zones themselves? The zones, my friend Jem says something that I find very true, is that domains are descriptive. They describe the underlying physiology, and then zones are prescriptive, as in this is how we plan and organize training to make our life easier and communicate with our athletes better insofar as what we're trying to achieve with each session. And I also think, Evan worked with the best CrossFitters on the planet. I'm lucky to work with some great athletes as well, but I'd say that the bulk of the people that I work with is at the competitive, but let's say quarterfinal to semifinal level athletes. I don't have a lot of exposure to game level athletes and working with those populations, so maybe our points of view are slightly different because of that, and at least in part. But I like the idea of just thinking about those intensity domains. So you mentioned threshold 1, threshold 2. So moderate domain would be below threshold 1, and then heavy domain is between threshold 1 and 2. Severe domain is beyond threshold 2. We can also kind of classify that from a temporal standpoint if we really want to. I'd say threshold 2, it's different if we talk about critical power, if we talk about some metabolic steady state. But if we talk metabolic steady state, I'd say it's anywhere from 40 to 60 minutes of continuous effort. That's a good representation of that. That's one of the reasons why the original FTP test was 60 minutes, right? That's, if you do 60 minutes all out, you have a really good estimation of your second threshold. If you do it via a critical power test, if you do like a 20 and 10, it's probably going to be more accurate than if you do, say, a 3 and a 12, even though that's what I use in CrossFit, simply because 3 and 12 are more CrossFit specific in their time domain.
Yeah.
So that's what I tend to use as tests for CrossFitters, especially to calibrate the profiling that I do with them. But let's go back to the main point, threshold 1, threshold 2, and then looking at those domains and already understanding what are we trying to develop in those different areas. And you can definitely push it to a zone model where you have 5, 6, 7 zones. I find it maybe simpler to approach by having less categories, because what really is the distinction between zone 3 and zone 4? It's almost like if we go back to terms
Yeah.
from the sprinting world, tempo or zone 3 is kind of extensive threshold work, and then zone 4 is kind of intensive threshold work. But at the same
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's kind of the same thing. It's
And
not,
I
but
think
it.
it's sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And I think it's like when you start delving into the realms of when it becomes mixed modal, those
Yeah.
lines are very easily blurred as well.
And that's why I do that's something that I do talk about the few times I've had the chance to talk about it in a formal setting, is that these categories break down once you start introducing different modalities and then changing those dynamics. Unless you're Travis Mayer and everything is like an air squat, and you can have that kind of, it's the same whether you're doing this or that. It's all going to be linear, and we both probably remember those, smooth SMO2 curves all the way through a mixed model workout, and the illustrations that Evan was using. So I think it breaks down once you have those bottleneck exercises that kind of throw a wrench into it and have a completely different impact on your organism compared to something cyclical, or something that you can make cyclical, like a light thruster or even chest to bar pull-ups for, the best athletes. So I still like to,
And
yeah.
sorry, I was going to go back. I like what you said earlier, I guess, talking about who you work with in terms of like quarterfinals, semifinals athletes. That's kind of the guys I work with mainly as well. And then it's, I guess the thought process beyond that is it's like the guys that are already there at the games, it's like they're kind of already there. It's like what much more, like, yes, it matters, but I think these guys are going to get better regardless of what's thrown at them, as long as, they're getting adequate rest, and they're kind of just really ticking those like 1%ers of what they have left to work on, instead of trying to make huge gains, because they're kind of already potentially up there, right?
Yeah, it's all going to be marginal gains once you're at that level. Although I've heard, and that's it's an N of one, but I spoke to Michelle Latondra, and she's been working with Pat Vellner for many years, and I think she said that a couple years ago she introduced that idea of 80-20 that is heavily kind of influenced from the endurance world and Steven Seiler's work, and just thinking in those terms of polarizing the intensity just from, okay, well, now you're at such a level that you cannot afford to do 3 hard metcons a day every day, because you are so powerful and so strong that you're going to just ruin yourself, right? And that's maybe one of the hard things to wrap our heads around, is where what you need in terms of CrossFit prescription, or what you could benefit from the most in terms of CrossFit prescription, is going to vary depending on where you are on the progression scale. And I saw a paper on emerge on Twitter the other day that showed that HIIT training had a better, more positive impact, let's say, on sedentary people than the low intensity continuous training or even heavy domain stuff. And that makes total sense, right? That this strong stimulus at the start would elicit great adaptations and get people kind of hooked into the thing as well. That's kind of part of the sport or the discipline, whichever one you're practicing. But then once you reach a certain level, you have to switch gears, and you cannot just do HIIT day in, day out, because when you don't have an engine, you can't do much damage, even if you try to go fast. But once you have a strong engine, but you haven't developed the chassis to support that, now you're in trouble, and now you're getting injured, and now you get to Thursday and you're tired and you don't want to finish your workout week because it's just too much and it's over and over, and or you can push for a week and you have to back off for 3 because you're always in the red zone. So those are all signs that you've kind of gone through those initial stages of adaptation, and you've gotten the quick gains, let's call them, from the intensity that you could at the start. But then you need to shift gears. So I like to think in those kind of 3 levels. You get the moderate domain, the heavy domain, and the severe domain. And that's kind of how I've organized my BikeErg training programs too for CrossFitters, which is there's going to be a great portion of the work that's going to be done in the moderate domain regardless. But then it's either we're going to take the angle of heavy domain, so we're going to do threshold type stuff, long and shorter, or we're going to do at the other kind of above threshold 2. So it's almost like it's either below threshold 2 or it's above threshold 2. And then depending on who you are and what you need, you would probably do better with one or the other. But then since it's a general quality that we're trying to develop, it doesn't really matter where you start. You could probably bounce back and forth between threshold work, VO2 max, and then sprint stuff, and then back and forth. And you would still keep progressing slowly over time. And those changes will take, months, and they'll keep going over years. So I guess I come at it from a much more, if we were to go back to the original question or where it started, I'd say I have a much more generalist or general approach of this work for CrossFitters at this stage, at least. I'm not deep enough into the CrossFit itself to be comfortable prescribing sessions that are mixed modal. That there's lots of things that I'm just not well versed enough in. What I do understand and I do know how to put together is the cyclical stuff, is the simple stuff, let's say. But I also see that this is also lacking in many CrossFitters, very much like in MMA, which are both young sports, both sports that have many skills that you need to master in order to become good at it or at them, which leaves little place for GPP. And that's, for me, that is the elephant in the room that we don't talk about. We have that pyramid of CrossFit, and at the base is nutrition, and then there's metabolic conditioning, and I always mess up the next two, but I think it's weightlifting, or it's gymnastics, and then it's
gymnastics,
weightlifting and throwing, and then the sport at the top. But this transition from CrossFit as a philosophy and a methodology to a sport, this kind of fork in the road went unnoticed by many. And once you turn your GPP into your sport, you lose the GPP aspect of things. And this is kind of what I see needs addressing the most on the conditioning side for CrossFitters, is that they don't do GPP anymore. They just practice their sport day in and day out.
The pyramid's flipped and the sport's the bottom portion now. Yeah,
exactly.
And it's very interesting, because it's like since CrossFit started, they obviously had that methodology of the pyramid that you're talking about, and that still hasn't changed to this day. But the actual sport business, whatever you want to call it, has grown exponentially, and it kind of hasn't adapted to that now. So like you said, and that's probably the biggest thing that I see from guys that come to me, is they're so used to, let's say they're in that closer to high to severe threshold, is all the work that they're doing. It's like they're not actually expressing either. They're not expressing anything at a low rate, and they're not expressing anything at a high rate, because they're just too fatigued, and they're kind of just trying to go 100% all the time, but they're stuck at 75%, so to speak.
It's the good old Charlie Francis high-low kind of idea, right? Keep your highs high and your lows low, and medium works in clothing, not in training. It's obviously we there has to be a distinction there, because he worked with sprinters, so those are very short events, and it's a kind of at the extreme of the spectrum. But I mean, sprinters still do a ton of tempo runs, right? It's not the same. It's not like 3 times 10-minute tempo runs that you would see an endurance athlete do, but they're like, 15, 20 seconds at a good click, but then you walk back the length of the field, and then you do it again, and then you do it again. So they're still accumulating a lot of miles. It's just not the same amount of miles that a marathoner might accumulate, but it's still relatively very low intensity compared to what they sprint on 100 meters. So it's all about understanding the context of where it fits. And like you said, if you're always trying to push 100%, you're going to find yourself actually expressing 80 or 85% every day, because you just cannot, from a nervous standpoint, especially with, the way CrossFit has evolved as a sport. And going back to something I said previously, there hasn't been, and I talked about this with Max when he was on the podcast, with Max Alhaj from Training Think Tank.
Yeah.
There is no conversation around that distinction between CrossFit the sport and CrossFit the philosophy. And I believe this is a gap that needs to be filled by people that know what they're talking about, people who are in the space, people who are half in the space, like maybe I am, with 1 foot in working with athletes. I'm not a CrossFit certified coach, though. I don't coach CrossFit per se. I've just been following it for since I started training. I mean, 10 years ago, I started with CrossFit. That's how I got into Olympic weightlifting. I competed in weightlifting, and I always kept an eye on what was going on. And I really think that the community at large would benefit from understanding the distinction between the philosophy and how it's applied to health and personal growth, and then the sport, which have very, very different demands. and require a different angle if we want to make it sustainable over time.
I guess when you to kind of go back into the more physiological side of things, when you kind of approach your guys, when you assess them, are you just going through your assessments through a energetic standpoint, or are you kind of taking any notes of like, let's say we can go down like the PRI rabbit hole of like whether they're more wide ISA versus narrow ISA, how that's going to affect, certain, whether they're on certain ergs, how that's going to affect the position that they might be in when it comes to like exercise selection, movement efficiency, movement economy, all those kinds of things. And then even just from a intermuscular coordination standpoint between those two kind of archetypes, is that something you take into consideration when you take your approach?
The more I move forward with this, and I definitely do have those archetypes, but they're not based on the different philosophies that you just mentioned. I have the age-old endurance to powerful spectrum of archetypes.
Yeah.
And on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being very endurant and then 5 being very powerful. That's usually how I operate. And I find that, again, at the level where I evolve, this is good enough for many people. And we don't need a much more complicated model to make sense of things. If you get someone who has a background in marathon or semis or I don't know, ultra and all that kind of stuff, you know what they're going to probably look like coming in, unless they're Cam Hanes. And then you know what they're going to be good at, and you know what they're going to struggle with. And that already gives you a lot of information as to what they need to do next, because they probably only, stick to what they're good at or what they like. And those two are usually close, if not the same. And all they need is a little bit of stuff that they don't usually do. And I tested a couple a few months ago that were very much alike in how they're built. They're not very muscular people. It was a guy and a girl, a couple. And so very endurance, I was going to say base, but very biased towards endurance type events, at least in how they're built. And they definitely need more sprinting. They need more high intensity stuff. But what I've also seen is that if you take somebody who's, probably doesn't carry a lot of muscle mass and isn't very strong and is more on the endurance side, if you just throw them into the deep end with Wingate sprints, you're just going to break them and you're not going to get anything out of them. So actually, okay, you're all the way here on let's say you're a 1 out of 5 on the endurance to powerful scale. And let's go to a 3 or a 4 as we start, this transition towards work that you're not fitted for, let's say, off the bat. So let's do a cycle of, hits work, like some VO2, zone 5, severe domain, whatever you want to call it. Let's do those type of things first. And then let's go, above that, extreme domain, sprints, very high intensity stuff. And then following that progression and usually, just exposure to stuff that people aren't used to doing, that opens up a lot of doors already. And I just had a call yesterday with a CrossFitter he's been, in CrossFit for 7-8 years now. He runs some gyms in the Netherlands, and he did my 12-week bike program. And we talked about the performances on the bike, but what I'm more interested in is the transfer to that bike work to his CrossFit. Because again, if my model makes sense, the general will have a positive impact on the specific. So start with the general, see how much it transfers, and then doing more general for a CrossFitter is always going to be a good thing because they're always doing the specific. So that's kind of how I think about it. I have that endurance to powerful spectrum. It's a little simpler model than what Evan uses with, I've kind of moved away from talking about the respiratory limited athletes, the cardiac limited athlete, the muscular limited athlete. There's some really interesting coaches in the let's say the physiology testing space that have obviously different perspectives on it, and certain will still tell you that it's all about cardiac output and this is always going to be the limiter. Others will say that respiratory will never be a limiter. I don't agree with that. I just wouldn't classify it the same way. For me, somebody who I can definitely say has a respiratory limitation that needs addressing is someone who, when I test, their RPE from the respiratory standpoint is always 1 to 2 points higher than the muscular and the general RPE. And that's how I kind of parse this out. If you feel like your breathing is hindering you and you can't express your fitness fully because of what you feel when you're breathing, this has to be addressed. But then for me, that's the only sound way of finding a respiratory limitation. It's literally if they tell you that they're limited by how they breathe and that they could have gone a step farther, their legs were okay, but their breathing was not. So I would just classify it a little bit differently. And then parsing out the cardiac limited from the muscular limited, it looks great on paper and it makes sense to people when you talk about it. But I find it with the work that I've done so far, at least, and despite all the data I've been able to collect on, dozens and dozens of people, it's not that easy to parse out between one and the other. So I've kind of evolved that model, let's say, that I kind of took at the beginning and borrowed from Evan and morphed it into what I just expressed before, which is I guess a simpler model, but that seems to do the job just fine for the vast majority of people. And that model will probably evolve over time and maybe will add complexity, but why make it more complicated if it works as it is? So that's kind of where I am now in terms of archetypes.
I love it. I don't think it needs to be too much more complex than that. At least at a standpoint of training like energetics and I guess the approach that you might take to what's the word, like biasing training. And I think the big thing is like not keeping that separation of, let's say, like that GPP versus that sports specific type like skill work or working on movement efficiency or those kinds of things. And it's like knowing that you don't have to do this one all the time, and you can actually do this one here, and it is going to carry over because it's physiological. It's like general strength training versus some type of specific weightlifting. It's like if you get your squat stronger and you keep the skill of weightlifting in the back pocket, all in all, hopefully, like your squat's going to go up once you kind of build that skill back up if you have had a break from a decent amount of time, so to speak. And maybe treating it like an on and an off season within CrossFit, not an on season all the time, and having those clear delineations between the two things. Because at the end of the day, it's like we're a body that adapts to certain things. It's like we just have to adapt to those certain things that are going to get us close to our goal. And it's like doing 50 dumbbell snatches isn't necessarily the best way to get the adaptation you might be after if you're already good at dumbbell snatches.
Yeah, and it's a good kind of segue into the next part of the conversation, and that's also a part of the conversation that is, I think, currently lacking, especially in the let's call them sub elite CrossFit realms, because obviously at the games level we all saw how Matt did it. He talked about it pretty vocally. He took a month to a month and a half off completely after the games, gained 10, 15 pounds, whatever it was, drinking and not being active, and literally just voluntarily detraining his body. We talked about this with a good colleague and friend of mine, Pat Davidson, on the podcast a while back. He talked about block -1, right? So in your periodization, in your progression, what are you doing this block that prepares you for the next one, which is kind of block 0 if we go in that, play along with that idea. And what you want to do is resensitize your body to the stimulus you're going to apply, so it's even more potent. And so, for example, about moving away from all things training, well, resensitize your body to training. And this is why in any elite sport, this is what people do. You have a yearly, sometimes you even have a 4-year cycle, right? If you're going for in the context of an Olympic sport.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think this conversation is starting to emerge now and has been emerging for some time in CrossFit. And again, by necessity at the highest level, because these guys cannot just do the same thing day in and day out year round. And it's starting to trickle down at the, let's say, intermediate level and then intermediate plus, which is good. But it's kind of going back to age-old periodization ideas. The Russians talked about this almost 100 years ago, and everything since. It's maybe the very counterculture mentality of the initial CrossFit movement that was very much, we do things differently. We're not like other disciplines, and our thing works, and we don't need those other models and all that stuff. Uh, we're coming back on it now by necessity because of the volumes
Yeah.
that are involved, because of the field that's getting better and better. It's getting denser. There's more and more competition. And so you just have to start being smarter in how you distribute your work and your intensity throughout the week, but also throughout the year. And like you said, there's got to be an off season. There's got to be consideration of how many competitions you partake in if you're a competitor, and when you want to be in top shape, and how do you taper, and how do you peak, and how do you do all those things that, again, other competitors have learned how to do from the start if they were well coached, simply because this is how you can express elite performance, or at least your full potential. So I think this is also another part of the conversation that I'm trying to also bring to CrossFit, or at least the space that I'm evolving in, is just get coaches to understand that these are all things we need to be thinking about at all times, especially when we start to be competitive or want to be competitive. And not only for the performance side, but also for the athletes themselves and their health and their longevity in the discipline, because this is going to have a big play in it. If you're just grinding every single week, every single day, all out, like you did in your first days of CrossFit, you're not going to have the same longevity as if you again, treat your body like it's your job, and you apply the right stimulus at the right time, and you have a transition period after your big competitions, and you have an off season where you work on the fundamental qualities that are going to allow you to then express your CrossFit, your fitness in CrossFit. One thing that always comes to mind when I talk about this is Matt again. When he won the Open that one year, I have to go back and figure out which year that was, probably 19 or 20, something like that. He won the
Yeah.
Open,
Yeah.
and he said, damn it, I wasn't supposed to be ready. Like, I'm not supposed to be the fittest now.
Yeah.
So he was kind of annoyed, or there was a comment around it. And I think what we need to realize is that up to the up to the time of the Open, Matt didn't really do any CrossFit per se. So yes, if we admit that CrossFit is everything, of course he was doing CrossFit, but he wasn't doing any
Yeah.
tests of fitness within CrossFit. He wasn't doing any Metcons, 3 rounds for time, AMRAP 15. He was just building the foundation. Essentially, he was doing his general work, just like cyclists have, the a long preseason where they do a lot of volume at low intensity, which is then going to allow them to express their maximal fitness later in the season. Well, he did the same. He did weightlifting, he did strict gymnastics, he did strength, he did some ergs, and then he got to the Open, and just through this general training, he was already way above everybody else. He hadn't even started
Yeah.
getting specific and into CrossFit. No wonder 4 or 5 months later, he destroys everybody at the games, because his general peak is higher than your specific peak, is kind of where I'm getting at. And
100%. And I think, like, even down to that standpoint, he probably allows that separation of the general physical preparedness side of things and the skill side of things. So it's like he's not getting this mixed input of two separate things that are trying to kind of cause some type of adaptation, whether it's through coordination or through energetics or some type of strength adaptation. Is allowing both of them to kind of have the full effect at their times of their times of input, so to speak. So, and then when he comes to put them together, it's like there's a better package there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also something that I see a lot of competitors in CrossFit struggle with, is being patient enough and allowing that process to unfold, and say, no, I'm not going to be fit like tomorrow. If I test my Fran in 3 days, I'm not going to PR my Fran. I'm not going to be maybe even close to my personal best. But I know that this is work that I'm doing to be at my peak in 2 months, in 4 months, in 6 months for the next competition. And so having the patience instead of that, I almost see it as an instant gratification mindset
Yeah, for
in
sure.
CrossFit. Not for everybody. And
I think it's definitely there. And I think it might be to do with, like, when you first start CrossFit, it's just like, because it's just this newbie stage, you're PBing every movement every week, you're learning these new skills that you're picking up every week, and you constantly have this gratification.
Yeah.
Then you get to a level and it's gone. It's
Yeah.
pulled out from underneath you, and you're just like, that just means I have to add more, when it's like, yeah, no, you probably just have to wait a little bit longer this time.
Yeah, it's essentially how long do you leave between two tests of your fitness? And if when you're new, you can test yourself every week and it's just going to go up and up and up and up, especially because it's a different test every week. So it's bound to just keep increasing. And you see that at the highest level in other sports as well. People don't test themselves every week to see if they're fit now and if they've kept their fitness and if everything's okay. No, they know when they're going to test themselves, and it's going to be for a specific reason at a specific point in time, usually for a competition. And this is how I think a lot of CrossFitters, at least competitive CrossFitters, would benefit from thinking, is just seeing it as on a slightly longer time frame. And the more fit you are, the more distant the peaks are between your I guess your peaks of fitness and between your major competitions. And that has to shape the way you approach your season if you want to, express the most fitness possible while also maintaining your body and yourself from a longevity standpoint.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think you nailed it right there. I think, and then it all just comes down to that education side of things. Is the education going to come for, I guess, the masses of CrossFit, for this movement to kind of go ahead, so to speak? Have you seen it? Have you seen changes? I guess because it's like, at least from friends and other guys I work with that are on, like, Mayhem, Proven, all those other programs that exist. I've had to scroll through those programs and have a look, and it's like they don't reflect these things. They kind of, they do here and there, but I think the common trend reflected among most of them is the more you do. So
it's difficult. I think it's difficult when you're trying to give something for everybody at the same time. Everybody's going to have different goals. Somebody wants to be competitive in a couple of weeks for the Open. Someone else is preparing for the semis. If you're on the same training cycle, then it doesn't work. And then you look at the summer and there's all those independent competitions and you want to partake. And when do you peak? How do you organize your training? How do you taper? I see it slowly emerging for sure. Again, through that conversation I had yesterday with Fabien, who finished my program, and he said at the end, and that's kind of the drive behind a bunch of what I do, is he did my bike program, he improved his bike, but he also saw the transfer on his CrossFit and this slightly different way of approaching the training with those longer time domains and again, just a different feel to what we're used to when we go all out for anywhere from 2 to 20 minutes. And he said he's going to try now and implement that philosophy and include more of that train of thought into his training and into the training for his members as well. So I definitely see it happen. Unfortunately, for some, it's going to come through necessity, as in, well, you see, it's I hope it trickles down in the sense that the people that apply it properly will rise to the top, and then everybody who's following will have no choice but to do the same. I just see, I mean, and you see it in older sports or more mature sports, let's say, because I'm not saying old to be derogatory. Triathlon, for example, you see everybody trending towards individualization of intensity and making sure you're doing the right training at the right time and not try to do everything all the time and not try to just mimic the pros because you want to be like the pros, trying to think at your level, where are you right now? What do you need? Okay, let's do that. So I do see it, but it's not a homogeneous process. And it's going to take a lot of time. And I hope that through some of the content that I put out, this transpires and some people will get inspired and maybe try to apply it to their level and get good results. Because at the end of the day, that's all I care about, right? I want people to get better and to reach their goals. So we have to make sure also that it's transfers and it applies. And there's still lots to learn, I guess, in the intricacies of applying it in different contexts and situations.
100%, man. Nah, awesome. I love it. Appreciate it, to be honest. Like it's awesome to hear. And I guess everyone that asks me, where can I understand this stuff further to apply to my training? I'm like, go to Sean. Like, the stuff that you put out. I know Evan's not doing as much now with his business. And then even like the Training Think Tank guys put some good stuff out there, but I guess for CrossFitters, I haven't seen many other places. So
And I hope we
Yeah.
see more. And I hope we see more. And I know that Henshaw did some great work with aerobic
Yeah,
capacity,
for
and
sure.
there's definitely people that talk about it. We just need to find ways to maybe amplify that signal, and then tune down the noise a little bit, and try to go. And I really think we can. And it's funny because CrossFit has done that really well in some regards, but not others.
Mm,
What I mean, what
yeah.
I'm talking about is learning from other sports. They've taken
Yeah.
in weightlifting, they've taken in
Yeah.
gymnastics, they've taken right, but then at the same time they've left out a whole bunch of other stuff. And
Yeah.
now again, by necessity, we have to learn from the best. And when we look at sports that have been around for 100 years, there's things to learn. There's things to learn from everybody, and we owe it to ourselves if we want to be the best version that we can, and we want to be the best in our sport, to also, look elsewhere, even if it's, a different philosophy, a different sport, not the same type of efforts, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter, because if we can work from the right principles, then everything will work as it should in its own context. So I guess that's a lot of what I do. I go and talk to experts in other fields and then try to bring it back to my context and the
Yeah.
CrossFit, MMA, and different sports. So I think I would just encourage people to stay open. Don't be afraid to go watch some cycling videos and figure out, okay, why are they doing that? That's something that I find extremely fascinating, is how deep and wide every sport actually is. And until you've
Yeah.
actually put your foot in there and started watching and try to understand, you have no clue. And we think we understand because I've done sports my whole life, and I've practiced many of them for a number of years, but there's still so many things on the map that I have no clue how it even works. I might know the rules because I read a book when I was a kid, but you don't know how they train. You don't know all those things. And I think getting out of our little box and trying to see what's out there and what we can gain from that is an opportunity that's just there on the table, especially today with all the podcasts, all the videos. Everybody's putting out, quality content, or at least if you look, you can find it. So that's probably what I would encourage people to do, is just go look elsewhere what's going on, and try to see how it can
Yeah.
help you.
No, I love it. Couldn't have really said it better. Like, there's not everything has obviously been found and understood, but a damn lot has been outside of CrossFit when it comes to sport performance and,
For sure.
principles around, adaptation and programming and all those kinds of things. And it's like, take the gold nuggets from each, apply, see what works. If
Yeah,
it doesn't, throw it out, try something else,
absolutely.
Awesome. Cool, man.
Anything else I could
Appreciate it.
help you with, man?
Um, no, that covers a lot of the conversation, I guess. And, it's good to kind of pick your brain and understand your views on things. And it's just good to have this conversation with people that have a similar thought process. Obviously, no one's thought process is the same, and I always love different. The challenge is always good, and
Mhm.
like I like listening. Listening is always it's funny, right? Like, because myself and my two other business partners, we have a podcast as well, and we've only been running it for about 2 years now, and it's definitely taught me the difference between hearing and listening. It's easy to sit there and hear, but then it's like, oh, did I take any of that in, or did it kind of just disappear? So
Yeah, and that's
I
also
really appreciate.
that's one of the hard things about all the information available today. I'm guilty of that as well, consuming a lot of content, but not necessarily integrating all of it. It requires work, right? Listen,
Mm,
listening is passive, hearing is active. And then if
mhm.
you want to integrate the material, you probably have to make sure you took some notes, and then rewrite your notes, and then integrate those notes into the other stuff that you think you knew before, and see how it all
Yeah,
fits. But that study time is a lot of work, and I tried now, and I've figured out over time that this is kind of how I function. That's why I create those presentations on YouTube. That's my way of structuring
yeah,
the information that I find, and see if what I think makes sense actually makes sense, and get people's feedback on, okay, am I completely, off the rocker, or is there something there?
Do
um
you get much feedback from like people kind of challenging you on certain things, or not as much as you'd like?
I'd like to
Because
have
I
more.
know, yeah, because I know that's like something I've found. Like I post a fair bit on Instagram. Same thing. It's like where I distill my information of what I've learned. It's like, am I on the right track? And someone please, I don't know whether you tear me down. I don't care. It's gonna at least give me some type of somewhere else to look instead of just twiddling my thumbs, like, did I miss the mark? Or
Yeah, it's tough, I think, in the beginning. I'm a very non-confrontational communicator. I don't go for, trying to antagonize a certain demographic or a certain viewpoint. I really try to take it all in and synthesize and understand the overall picture. So I guess I don't lend myself to much hate, which would be like online hate, something that some
yeah,
people might. I get a shitty comment once in a while. Like I got one 3 days ago, and somebody says I forget what I was talking about. I think I was talking about endurance in the context of CrossFit, and somebody said, "What's all this blah blah bullshit?" And I just responded, "Thank you for your constructive comment," with a little pissy emoji. I mean, I got nothing
yeah,
else. I cannot spend any time being mean to people online. It's just not. And he wasn't even being mean. It's just he said what he thought, and it wasn't very helpful, but it was what it was. But I'm that's kind of one of the things I'm looking for is the feedback, is the questions, and I'd love to have more of those. I get a lot of positive feedbacks, and more now that I'm starting to gain some visibility on the work that I do. And thankfully it's been, the vast majority has been positive. But I always welcome and encourage, constructive feedback, because this is how we learn. This is how we grow, and ideas need to be challenged. And this is how, think of it as a sculpture, right? We always think of the truth as being something that you build, but the truth with a capital T is more something that you carve out of a big block of stone, and it's kind of the last man standing. It's whatever's left at the end after you've picked at it and thrown everything that you had to try and take it down. And so I think as long as it's done in good faith, it's always a good idea to challenge ideas. Try not to go ad hominem and target the person themselves.
of course.
But there's enough good folks out there that this is slowly happening. And yeah, I think this is the way forward, is exchanging. I mean, just like we're doing today, answering questions. And then, yeah, sometimes we have to challenge, sometimes we have to ask harder questions. And I think everything positive is going to come out of communication regardless. And in this very polarized world at this point in time, the best we can do is interact, whether it's online or in person. We need to interact, and we need to challenge ideas, and we need to kind of find where the middle sits, and try to all live together, I guess.
Yeah, and that's it. Like, we're not in competition with one another. We all
No.
we should all have the same goal. And it's like, whether the competition is, get more athletes than X, Y, Z. It's like, no, there's enough people. There's a lot of people.
And for
So
anybody who's listening and really loves their discipline, and I guess a bunch of CrossFitters will listen to that, but probably people from other realms as well. If you really love your sport or your discipline, you owe it to your sport to actually be more positive. And what can you bring to the field? What are you doing to make things move forward? And again, in such a young sport like CrossFit, there's a lot of opportunities to move things forward in a positive way. And like you said, we're all coaches. We're not competitors with, oh yeah, I have more people in my program than you do, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Are we all helping? Are we all pulling in the same direction? Because again, if we really care, this is what we should be all doing. So I think it's a good message for coaches out there who maybe feel like there's a lot of competition. There's enough, coaches and athletes for everybody, and we shouldn't
exactly.
think that by withholding information we're going to be better. It's actually the opposite, and I can testify of that through my 3+ years of just saying everything that I have to say openly and sharing it online. It's you become better by sharing what you know, rather than keeping it thinking that you have the secret sauce, because guess what, you learned it from somewhere, so you're not the only one who has it. And
Exactly right.
it's the first one who speaks who actually gets the props for it. So speak up
Yeah.
and be open, and I think it'll be good.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better, man. That was well said.
Well,
How do you do it? You post a lot. How do you create and post how much time do you spend creating content?
most of my time now. It was before. So earlier in the interaction, I talked about the change that happened here in January. So in December, I stopped the 2 days of personal training a week that I still had going on. So they were pretty full on days, with usually between 6 and 8 hours of coaching, a lot at home. So I would try to do a lot of driving back and forth between my clients during the day. Usually just, just gen pop, just fitness, trying to stay fit while having a family and working and all those things for most of my clients. And in parallel to that, I was doing everything else. So, going to France for seminars and doing testing with athletes, whether it's here or elsewhere, plus all my content, my podcasts. And so in January, I just freed up 2 whole days per week that now allow me to spend more time creating content. So
That's
I spend most of my time doing that, and it's kind of split between free content, which I try to do a lot of because it's how I worked from the beginning, and I want to keep doing. It's one of the things I love doing is sharing with the community and try to get stuff out there that I find interesting. If it helps someone, then good. If it's an obscure topic that only interests me, that I'm fine with that as well. But I spend a lot of time doing it. I draw a lot of inspiration from Gary Vee and the way he operates. And for the last few years, I've been, I guess, applying his philosophy to the way that I work, and it's been working. Document, don't create. So just try to speak what's on your mind. Take every opportunity like this one to have interactions. And if you're going to be talking and it's going to be interesting, why not record it? So that's what I try to do as much as I can. And so I'd say out of a 5-day week, I probably spend at least 2 whole days creating content. And that's split between, creating the clips and then doing the podcast and then doing the presentations and then recording them. I'm doing putting a lot more time and effort now into SEO. That's something I've done in the past for a different company and that I understand quite well. And there's a huge gap, especially in French, in some of the topics I'm talking about. So I'm kind of going full steam into that. So that also takes some extra time. It's not just, I used to do a lot of videos, but it was a lot of volume, as in I would record a quick video every day, 5 to 10 minutes, and just post it. And it was my thought of the day, and it worked great. And I didn't have much time. So that was good because I could do it between clients or whatever. But now I have more time and I want to be more, I want to have more thought go into the content that I create, so that it's not just content that goes out now and doesn't serve me, 6 months down the line. So I'd say I'm spending quite a bit of time, and I'm tending towards spending even more time to do it.
Awesome, man. I love that. It's quite funny you say that, because starting next month, myself and my other business partner have gotten rid of 2 days of our army job work per week to do more of this type of stuff. So, and we're like, I don't know, I've never been so excited for a life change in terms of business for a really long time.
It's
and
good.
Now this has arisen, and I'm just like, I don't know, because I'm the same. I love distilling, and it's more just like, it's, whether it's right or wrong, it's like, cool, let's have conversations about this, because I want to learn more. Like, I never used to like learning when I was younger, and now I'm just like, I just want to know everything in this respective field,
Yeah, it's funny, like you said, I made a video a while back, and I think the title was "I started learning when I finished school," something like that. And the point of the video was just that it took me to finishing school and then trying to figure it out on my own to actually learn how I'm supposed to learn and how I find information and digest it and synthesize it. And that's still an ever evolving process. I started a lot with those, presentations. I'm starting to write more because I'm not good at it and I don't do it often enough. And I know it's a skill that I need to master. And that's probably going to evolve into how I, move forward more. And as I spend more time and get better at it, I'll be more efficient with it and I can do more in a short amount of time. But it's interesting how this new world has opened us to figuring out ourselves a bit better and how we learn. And it's an interesting process to go through as I guess as a coach or just someone who's passionate about a topic and wants to know more.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's good lessons to have, again, to even have those conversations with clients that you might train about, there's more to come,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a never ending story anyway.
Awesome, man.
We're gonna try, but we've already lost. We will never know everything by the time we're out of this world. So all we can do is do the best that we can, knowing that we won't know everything, and but have fun in the process, I guess.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate the time and being able to have the conversation with you. And I hope to do it again at some point in the future, whether, I don't know, I'll probably even, if you're free at some point, probably over the, not next month, maybe after, to jump on our podcast, have a chat. Like,
For sure, man.
I'd
Let's do
love to
it.
kind of keep this communication open, and I'll comment on more of your videos.
Yeah, definitely comment on all my videos. Tell me what you think, and especially if there's things you don't agree with, put them in there.
Awesome.
And I think it's good to be challenged at the level of ideas. Let's definitely do your podcast in February. I'm pretty busy, but March should work. But it was fun to chat, man. I appreciate you taking the time to ask me your questions, and it was good to exchange.
No, awesome, man. Really appreciate your time, and yeah, I'll let you know later in March.
Sounds good to me. Take care.
Awesome. Too easy. All right. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate your time.